Thank you very much for listening politely. The person you've come to listen to is Jan. I cannot blame my father for the fact I'm here, yes, but here tonight, no. Over to you, Jan.
Thank you. Namaste. I wasn't going to start like this, but it was so amusing when Ashika said, where are you who went on the 2015 tour? Right, you can promote. In other words, I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to stand here talking. Many years ago, when I had my own program in Bristol called Women Only, which it wasn't Women Only, I had to interview, this was early 70s, 5 fabulous-looking Indian women. And in those days, there weren't these indelible pens, and I was so worried about forgetting their names that I wrote the 5 names down on my hand. And then, as you do, I got rather sort of a little bit hot in the hand, looked down, and all I had was a black mess. So I said, ladies, you're all so beautiful. Please, please introduce yourselves. Anyway, I wasn't going to say that, but I have now. I actually don't really know where to start because I've been bowled over by all the talks I've attended, and I've attended them all except one this afternoon, which I meant to attend, but I got engaged in conversation with Craig and his wife and a few other people and kind of missed it. But they're all so erudite that I just feel, I hope I won't let you down. I just wish that my father and I had known about FIBIS before he died. He only died a few years ago, 4 months short of his 100th birthday. He was born in Kannur in the Nilgiri Hills, and he came to England just before partition. His family, according to my father, went back to the time of Clive. His mother died when he was 13, and he said at 13, I wasn't interested in the family. So I never did know whether we went out with Clive in the military or whether we worked for the East India Company. After his mother died, his father married again, and for some reason, she died within about 8 years. I don't know what he did to them. But her children took our family Bible. I have always had this feeling that I've got Indian blood. And when I returned from Australia in 1966, I was acting in Australia, and had my fiancé not been killed in a car crash, you'd probably never have heard of me because I would have stayed in Australia. But you don't think straight when tragedy occurs and you're very young. Mind you, I don't think straight now, but nothing much has changed. So I came back, and in Australia I was unique. I was small, very tanned, black hair. I got the Italian, French, Greek, all those parts that the big Australian ladies weren't quite right for. I came back, and of course, reality hit. I couldn't get any work, so I fell back into television. And in Manchester, it was the very first sitar concert given by Ravi Shankar. And I went to it in the Free Trade Hall. Why did I do that? I mean, I'd never studied India, apart from knowing Daddy was born there. That's really all I knew. It wasn't even my research. I'm not even sure, having listened to the specialists, that I would know where to start. But a member of my mother's family was doing research, and she went up to Olympia for this ancestor research business. I didn't even know. She went to the British Records Office, and she came back with 2 marriage certificates. So I do know a little bit about my grandfather. When he got married, he married Mary Scanlon, so there's the Irish bit, and he was either a civil engineer or he worked on the railway. And then she also gave me the marriage, so I haven't got births and deaths, but I've got the marriage certificates of my great-grandfather, and he married a girl called Caroline Jelly, who was only 13. So I jumped to a conclusion that if she was 13, she must have been Indian, but I heard the other day that even the English married at 14. Anyway, that's as far as I've got. I haven't had any time to go any further. I've just moved house, and although I only had half a dozen nice photos of my family in India, I couldn't find them. But this is one I did come across. That's my grandfather and my grandmother. So that's Henry and Mary. Now, something I have got, which might be very useful, is a watch chain. I haven't got the hunter, but I've got the watch chain. It's my grandmother's hair. So I think I've got a bit of DNA there. This is not a good photo, but my father is the one in the middle, and I think he looks very Anglo-Indian. Obviously by then his mother was dead, so he would have been about 13. We're a very small family, and I'm the only one in our family who's had a child at all, Jonathan, and he changed his name to mine, and it isn't even mine, and it's very complicated. So Daddy gave the family watch to my cousin's son. Now, I don't know whether this is the Masons or the Order of the Buffaloes. So that's a little bit of research that I need to go into. Now, I've said I would be very proud to find that I've got Indian ancestry, and I'm fairly sure I have. This was a picture of me before a car accident smashed my nose completely, so it had to be remodeled. And I tell you what, don't ever have your nose remodeled unless you've got to. So I don't think I exactly look terribly English. And that was another one. Now, another thing my father gave me, and there's a lovely story. I'm a bit into believing in clairvoyancy and things like that. And I was going through yet another troubled period, and my hairdresser and friend in Bristol said, oh, I think you ought to go, or you ought to ring this lady in Southampton, she's really good. So I rang up this woman. I'm fairly sure she hadn't been tipped off, and in those days I was only working locally, so she wouldn't have seen me. And we had a few chats, and she said, your father's knee is hurting again, it's bad. And I thought, I don't know about that. And then she said, and there's a sword in the garage. Well, everybody's got a sword in their garage, haven't they? Anyway, I couldn't wait to get on the phone to my father, so I sort of, what sort of day have you had, and how's the garden? And how's your health? Oh, he said, my knee. And I thought, the hairs came off on my arm. I said, have you got a sword in the garage? Yes. And this is it. It's a cavalry sword, as you can see, and it belonged to my father's cousin. It's inscribed Lieutenant Fahy, awful lot of Irish in our family, and so that's the sword. And on the hilt, it was made in London by J.B. Johnston of, I could read it at one stage, it's a street in London. No, Sackville Street. Sackville Street. And that's not come out very well, but that says Lieutenant Fahy. So if anybody knows, and I'm quite serious, how you get the right ribbons, I would like to hang this on a wall, but I want the right, I don't know, brigade colours or whatever you call it. So that was cavalry. Right, so I know a little bit about my family, and after today, my heart has sunk, because I really don't think I have the mindset to do everything you have to do, so I might have to pay somebody to do it, because if I do it, I'll be dead before I get there. Now, I've always wanted to go to India. When I was working hard, all I wanted in my 2 weeks holiday was to go to the seaside and read a good book. So I didn't go to India. I've been alone. I've been single for 15 years. And when I was picked out to be interviewed for a program, the reason I said yes, I would put myself up for interview was that it was to go to India. Now, how many of you saw the Exotic Marigold Hotel film? Oh yes, yes. Well, what some bright spark decided was that they were going to make a documentary documentary, all 8 of us were slightly conned because it ended up being reality. So I went through an hour and a half's interview, hoping I would get it, and I was offered the job. So 8 of us were sent out to the Golden Triangle area. Now somebody today, I think it was Jill, who said she'd been asked about who do you think you are? Why don't they use ordinary people? Well, the same thing, I've been asked that, and I can understand. I mean, I'm ordinary. I go to the Sainsbury's and I buy toilet rolls and I do my own housework and everything else. I'm ordinary, but I've got a job that's slightly extraordinary. And she was quite right when she said that if you used ordinary folk, and many of you have got fantastic backgrounds, but would the public watch you? Anyway, there were 8 of us. Miriam Margulies, Rosemary Schrader, Bobby George, the darts player, Roy Walker, who used to present Countdown, Patty Boulay, who won New Faces in 1972. Why is that? She's still very beautiful. Wayne Sleep. So off we went, and it was only a matter of hours into our trip that we realised that this was not a documentary, it was reality. It was hard work. Some of it was fun, but an awful lot was hard work. We arrived and we didn't quite go straight to our Haveli. And I'm sure, because you all know about India, the Haveli is the family home. And it isn't just the rich that have it, even the poor live in this sort of compound where the grandparents are on the ground floor, the mother and father are on the next floor, and the children on the top, because there aren't any lifts. Well, the Haveli at which we were going to stay had been divided up between the brothers in this family. And Amer, the brigadier, had an eye problem, so he'd had early discharge from the army. So they decided with their bit of the Haveli, and they were Singhs, it was quite a rich family, they'd turn it into a sort of B&B. So on our way to the B&B, we went to a restaurant, and this to me is India. I mean, look at those whiskers, isn't he lovely? Now, Jill also said today, you have no idea how much ends up on the cutting room floor. Now, when I started out in television, which was over 50 years ago, I used to go out filming, and it was film, it had to be developed. So you'd go out for an article that went out that evening, come back, develop it, sit with the editor, and write the story. I mean, and we filmed on a ratio of 3 to 1, so that if you wanted an hour's programme, you shot for 3 hours. Once I was sent off for a radio interview to interview a shantyman in Wales, I think it was. It was my first interview, and I came back with about an hour and a half, because anybody who knows me, I can talk and I can ask questions. And when I came back, my boss said, "How much have you come back with?" I said, "Hour and a half." He said, "I want 3 minutes." And lit cold. And I looked at him, I said, "I don't know how to do it." He said, "I will do it this time, but don't you ever do that again." So radio ratio used to be, I think it was 9 to 1, and film was expensive, so it was 3 to 1. Today, apart from the lovely series on which they spend a lot of money and which are a tribute to British broadcasting, everything else is done on the cheap. Digital is cheap. Editing is expensive. And I've done some film in Argentina, which will be going out about Christmas. And we actually asked the producer, because we were being worked like slaves, "How many hours do you do to get 1 hour's programme?" He said, "About 50. So as Jill said, an awful lot you never see. Now, one of the things when we were in India was Bollywood dancing classes. Unfortunately, I haven't got a picture of myself with Patty because I was taking the photos. But and this doesn't really translate, but it was hilarious to see Roy Walker and Bobby George. Between them, they had 4 left feet. And as we were driven into old Jaipur, I was expecting to see poverty. I wasn't quite expecting to see this kind of a mess. You know, can you see that? Not terribly well. Are you sure? Anyway, you know, the pigs, the goats, the cows, all eating in the street. In fact, Sushma used to boil the milk every day because you didn't know what the cows had been eating. Then I loved the entrepreneurial skills of this bike with how many layers on it. And health and safety, eat your heart out. You regularly saw that. And you know, everybody was pinching electricity from everywhere else. But next to all this chaos were beautiful buildings like that. Absolutely beautiful. We expressed a desire to see nice things and carpets. They took us to this grotty little place. Never judge a book by its covers. And I thought, well, we thought we were coming to a carpet weaving place. It was incredible inside. It was like Aladdin's cave. That chap was sitting, not cross-legged, he had his legs behind him on 2 bricks, and he sat virtually all day doing that. Relative to what one would pay here, the carpets were cheap. Well, relatively inexpensive, but not that inexpensive, so I didn't buy one. And everywhere, of course, you saw the sacks of spices. You know, the streets were alive. They might have been dirty, but they were alive. And now I'll go to something else you didn't see. This did make me cross because we spent 2 days. One day was travelling, 4.5 hours there, 4.5 hours back, to Karoli in Rajasthan. We went there because those of you who saw The Real Marigold Hotel might remember the English jeweller, Emma. And she lived in a Haveli, which was owned by a princess. And the princess was a relation of this Maharaja, and it was his birthday. So we went up to Karoli as, well, I think we were guests. I don't know whether the production team paid. Now, the real old palace was 13th century. Of course, they'd long moved out of that one. But the next palace was 16th, and that was the Durbar Hall, which was being renovated. They moved from that in 1928 into the modern palace, which wasn't very modern, actually. I mean, it'll never be a 5-star hotel. But again, look at the scaffolding. But the thing I found amazing were the frescoes. Now, when our rich aristocrats were doing the grand tour, the Maharajas were doing their grand tour, and they fell in love with the Italian frescoes. So they imported the fresco painters. Now, these frescoes have been there for 400 years. I think they've been durable because in the old days, paint was made by grinding up precious jewels. I mean, that blue is probably ground up lapis lazuli. Absolutely incredible. And the prince and princess are trying to renovate. It will never be a hotel, but it will be a lovely tourist attraction. Here, a little bit of Trondeuil, and there, that's the courtyard of the old palace. And my photo can't do it justice. It was absolutely beautiful. I hope they achieve their dream and they can open it as a place that tourists can go to. Back to the Maharaja, we had dinner around this long table. I don't think the poor man knew what was happening because Sylvester McCoy, who was once a Doctor Who, played the spoons. Patty sang, what did she sing? She sang something French. Miriam was vulgar, as Miriam always is. I think she passed wind in tune or something. And the Maharaja just sat there. But afterwards, there was a ceremony where he was being presented with gifts, and we weren't allowed to go. I mean, there's still, you know, place for the women and place for the men. We waited in the courtyard of the modern palace, not that modern, nearly 100 years old now. And when the boys joined us, we had this lovely performance. and it was the story of Vishnu. I mean, all of them were guys. We'd had some beautiful weather, and that night it chose to rain, so we didn't see the whole thing. In the morning at breakfast, I haven't brought it because it's still packed somewhere. My father gave me his father's cigarette case, very tiny cigarettes in those days, and Daddy said he remembered seeing it being worked on the veranda of their bungalow, and it's very beautiful. Now, I don't need to tell you that in India the cows are sacred. But if they're malformed, they are even more sacred. Just outside Jaipur, there's the monkey temple, Hanuman. And the crew took us there. Very, very steep rise up to it. And there were these, that was one of the least bad. If you can see, that is another leg growing out of its shoulder. And the crew got me to kiss that. There was another one which I still haven't worked out, and I wouldn't show it to you, it was pretty revolting. But that was supposed to bring luck and all sorts of good fortune. Still waiting. The monkey temple, yet again, it took my breath away. All the frescoes, and again, 400 years ago, and it's all still there. Well, it is a monkey temple. And I like little monkeys. More frescoes. And then there was this barbed wire with bits of cloth on it. Now, at the temple, actually, the proper entrance is ground level, it's flat, but of course the crew got us to go up this terribly high hill at midday. You know, they always make it tough for you. So I asked why these bits of clothing were there and why the barbed wire. There's a gorge and the water comes out, goes down, and there's a lake at the bottom, and the Indians immerse themselves. They may be ill, they may want luck, they pray to Hanuman, they immerse themselves, and when they come out, they discard their clothes, just put in fresh clothes, and they leave them there. It's a bit like when you see Catholics who leave crutches and relics at wayside chapels, things. It's very similar. Oh, that was just a bit of a giggle. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. In the temple, there were a few holy men, and there was one who guarded this. They say it has been a light for 500 years. It's an oil light. And I just wanted him to smile. So he did. I thought he was lovely. I finished filming first, so they sent me back to the air-conditioned car and gave me this box of lunch, which was pretty inedible. And then this cow wandered up, so I ran the window down and fed him my lunch. And when Patty got back into the car, I said, "Look what I've taken." She said, "Kiss a kiss." The amber fort, which we could see from our Haveli. And yet again, I'm sorry to go on about the frescoes, but they really were beautiful. This is the hall, and I'm sorry if I'm, preaching to the converted, you may have seen it, but the Hall of 1,000 Mirrors. Unfortunately, the tourists have spoilt it for other people. They were picking bits of the glass off the temple, so now you can't go in. But we were told that if you lit one candle in the middle of that temple, you'd get 1,000 lights, and that's why it's called the Mirror of 1,000, the Hall of 1,000 Mirrors. I didn't quite cut this picture correctly because they were a bit naughty, and under the eaves there were all these paintings. That one's pretty clean, but a lot of them were Kama Sutra. I wanted to go to a Hindu wedding, but September, when we were there, was not an auspicious month for weddings. But we were there at the time of the Ganesh festival, that's the elephant god, of course. And our crew had paid to be in the festival, behind the elephants and in front of the horses. And we were just walking along being filmed. And I was invited to get on this beautifully caparisoned horse. I'm not a horse rider, I've never ridden a horse, but he was very sedate. So there's me with marigolds. Of course, that's where the title comes from. All these beautiful, beautiful garlands are marigolds. Where they get their flowers, I do not know. The flower market was awash with flowers and they're very inexpensive. And you had to say, Jai Ganesh, Jai Ganesh. So there I am on this horse, and people are holding up their babies to me, as though I'm going to bless them. But it was a lovely experience, it really was. The only thing that's upset me since then, which I did not know at the time, is I don't know about these elephants that they use for transport, whether they're relatively well looked after. But these elephants that take part in processions and that take tourists up to the Amber Fort and things like that, they are very cruelly treated, and I will never ever go on a howdah again. Again, elephant safety, eat your heart out. Look at that. Look, 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 look. And we saw mopeds with whole families. Mother, father, 3 children, baby in the middle. It's amazing.
No pressure on us. No.
We had to go to Varanasi, and just as I was leaving to go to India, somebody very precious to me died. And I went to they call it a talent producer, and I said, Ros, please could I miss out on this one? She said, no, you've signed a contract, you've got to go. We didn't see all the beautiful architecture. I had no idea it had such wonderful architecture. But the producer, who was a bit of a he knew what he was doing. And he had us on this street corner, very narrow street, and we were being jostled and pushed. And they brought the corpses along. And I just went like that, and there was a camera in my face. I didn't use an expletive, but I wanted to. What was nice was in the evening, the Brahmins perform a ceremony. Unfortunately, I can't tell you much about what it means, because our guide was very softly spoken, and with all the chanting and the music, we couldn't make it out. But this is what they have, these sort of candelabra of candles, and they move them round. It's very beautiful. And then they invite you at the end of that ceremony to put your votive in the Ganges, so a bit like a Catholic lighting a candle. You buy these little votives, marigolds again. Isn't he gorgeous? I wanted to adopt him. He's absolutely lovely. And you float it, and you think of your loved one. Well, the camera crew said you can't float them there because it's muddy. So they took us down to the Ghat area where there's a bit of a depth of water. And I put in 2. My mother, my father, and this person had died within months of each other. And I watched my votives go like that into the mud. So I'm not sure that they got such wonderful prayers and thoughts. Now, I don't know how you feel, but if I've looked forward to something for a very long time, I do often wonder, am I going to be let down? Am I going to be disappointed? Michelangelo's David, which I saw in Florence, in the 70s when I was doing an Open University course, I thought, why does everybody make such a fuss? You know, it's just a statue. And when you got there, I walked around it for 20 minutes, and it's just amazing. So, of course, I thought, am I going to be disappointed in the Taj Mahal? Well, the road up to it, as many of you will know, is appalling. I mean, it's a ghastly, rutted, it's got the most awful souvenir tat. But when we went through the gate and saw the Taj, it was breathtaking, despite all the people, because it was awash with people. Our crew only had permission to film just on the steps. I don't know whether they ever give permission to go and film closer, or maybe it's only very special people. So by the time they'd done all these interviews, because this is what reality television is all about, it's cheap and cheerful. So the cameraman director has a camera on his shoulder. So I'm interviewing you. You have to look past the camera and pretend you're talking to someone, and you have to introduce the question in the answer. So it's cheap and cheerful television. So by the time they'd interviewed all 8 of us, it was getting dusk, because we hadn't got there till 1 o'clock. And our talent producer, Ros, said, you've got 50 minutes, that's all. So we raced down to it's a long walk. We got there, and she said, right, that's it, we've got to go back. Now, I won't use the word, but you'll all know what I mean. When Wayne said, Wayne sleep, little Wayne sleep. If you think I'm effing coming here and I'm not going inside, you've got another coming. So we all thought, good for you, and we did go in. I mean, it's awash with people. But I had one lucky, a little bit of luck. This chap tugged at my sleeve. I thought he was official guide, and he had a torch. And he shone it behind the marble around the tomb of Shah Jahan and his wife. And the marble is inlaid with carnelian, lapis, semi-precious stones. It was stunning to see it like that. It was wonderful. You can't go there unless you sit on Diana's bench. Sorry, I just had to. You had to queue. And that parasol was a joke birthday present that year from some friends. I mean, it wasn't keeping the sun off because it was lace. It was the star of the show, because boys, girls, men, women were coming up and saying either could they have their photo taken with me with it, or could they borrow it? I don't think they'd ever seen one before, so that was fun. Now, I have always loved saris, and when I was in Australia, I went out with an Indian doctor, and I did wear saris occasionally. I mentioned Emma, the jeweller, living in the princess's Haveli. Well, it was the only time they actually allowed me to interview anybody, because usually they won't. And she was charming, absolutely charming. And when we'd finished, I said, you know, we've had no time off. I so wanted to go and buy a sari. She left the room, she came back, and she presented me with this thin parcel, which was that. Now, she just gave it to me as a long piece of material, which I suppose it's 5 meters minimum. All that beautiful gold brigade was put on that, and it cost me £7. £7, amazing. Now, I know that the Asian war cemeteries were mentioned, and I was expecting somebody to talk about them. So I put in a couple of slides from Burma, nothing to do with India, of course, but again, it's cemeteries. I was a representative for Just You Singles Holidays, and one of the chaps on the Burma holiday, Myanmar, had a friend who said, please would you look up my uncle, because he died in Burma. So we went to this cemetery, which is just north of Yangon, and we found his uncle's name. And there was a guide, and we chatted, and I said something about my interest in the RAF. And this was very, very new. A Dakota went down in September 1945 in the hills near a monastery, and the bodies were buried. They were reinterred in this cemetery only a couple of months before we went there. And when you looked along the names, I think there were 11. All but 3 had wings. They were Air Force. The other 3 were civilians. So one has a question mark. Was it a spy mission? What was it? Why were they on that plane? Well, that was just a little extra. Of course, you have had talks on Burma, and you're going to have another one tomorrow. So I just thought I'd put those in to say that people are commemorated around the world, no matter where you come from. And that was on the Haveli in Jaipur. And of course they used that as the motif at the beginning of the programme. The elephant starts walking, which I think is absolutely lovely. I've got a couple more clues. One is that my father's aunt was a concert pianist. I thought, well, how do I find that? And somebody suggested today that I should go to London Guild of Music or something like that, because she must have had exams and passed them. So I've got a few clues, but not many. Oh, something I must tell you, because Jill was a bit derogatory about journalists. Well, I'm not a journalist, I never have been, and I don't like them very much. No, I'm a presenter, interviewer, I'm a Jill of all trades, but never a journalist. So when she said that, I had to say I am not a journalist. But I've shown you a few little bits of film that never made the grade. All the bits that end up on the floor would make another documentary. So, apart from knowing that there was a military group called Atkins Horse, because that's my maiden name, I've got a few clues, but I think I'm going to need an awful lot of help. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel, next to all the experts, that I'm a rank beginner. It's been lovely being with you, really, really lovely. And I would like, before I die, to trace my Indian ancestry. So, may I ask you, dare I ask you to stand, or do you want to sit and toast 20 years of FIBIS, and to the next 20 years? Questions. They don't have to be about India, or they can be about television, or if you have any, I'd be delighted to answer. Yes?
What's your next project?
Trying to get everything right in a wretchedly jerry-built modern house. No. Actually, I have got a few projects. This is why I don't know if I'm going to be able to start doing research. I live near the Battle of Britain Memorial at Capel-le-Fern, and after I did I'm a Celebrity, I was invited to the Battle of Britain Memorial Day, and I always like to give if I receive. There wasn't much I could do, I was a guest, but there is a memorial wall, the Foxley Norris Memorial Hall, to the 3,000 pilots and aircrew who took part in the Battle of Britain. It's lovely because it's alphabetical and nobody has a rank. And I sponsored a name, and then I was asked what name I wanted. As far as I knew, none of my family were RAF, they were all Army, although I have found some since then. But I have French on my mother's side, so I said, well, give me a French name, please. There are only 13 Free French names on the Battle of Britain War. Charles de Gaulle did his appel on June the 14th, I think it was 1942, and then thousands of Frenchmen came across, but the Free French were declared traitors by the Vichy government. Of the 13, they could have given me anything, and they gave me René Mouchotte, and I looked him up. It was incredible. 6 years I spent doing research, and I did finally get a very small documentary made about him, which the BBC put out. And through that, I've become a vice president of the Yorkshire Air Museum, and the director wants me to write a book on my search for René Mouchotte, and it was amazing, from leaving a letter in his tomb in Père Lachaise. I mean, it's a lovely story. I wish I could share it with you. So that's one project, and then somebody else wants me to write a book on what you do when you retire. But the thing is, if you've ever written a book, I mean, you pour your lifeblood into it. My documentary on René was a labour of love. I never expected anything back for it. But when you've put a year of your life into something, you'd like a few pennies back. So there are 2 book projects that I'm supposed to be starting. I've already done The Argentine. This was the spin-off from the real Marigold Hotel, which was surprisingly popular. I have to laugh because it got 3 million. And when I was newsreading, I used to get 14 million. But there were only 3 channels, BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. So the spin-off was taking 4, and there were tick boxes, I'm afraid, to other countries to see how they treat their elderly folk. I wasn't part of the 4, I wasn't one of the chosen ones, I didn't tick a box. But Rosemary Schrader last year had filming commitments and she couldn't go to Cuba. So they asked me, and I thought, oh dear. Yeah, I'm going to go and see Cuba. So I went to Cuba. And I found out just before I went to Argentina that the Cuban one was the most popular. So I was asked to Argentina on my own. I mean, it was just me. I wasn't filling in for anybody. So that will go out at Christmas. We didn't really see much of Argentina. We were in Buenos Aires, and we were there a week, and we did. We never stopped. I can't tell you what the food was like because all we ever got was takeaways. You see, it's like businessmen who travel first class and stay in hotels, and you think, oh, that's all they ever do. See the inside of a hotel room and go to a conference and travel first class. We didn't travel first class. Filming is not glamorous. It's jolly hard work, but there's some pluses along the way. So I saw a bit of Cuba last year, a bit of Argentina this year, and God willing, I might get some more work, but if I don't, well, I can keep going till I die trying to look up my Indian ancestry. Anybody else want anything? Anything about television or? Yes?
In the Real Marigold Hotel, towards the end, if I remember correctly, you gave the impression that you might actually retire there, or generate by somewhere.
No, I didn't. I never intended to live there. I did think it might be a wonderful bolt hole for 3 months in the English winter. So, Real Marigold, I would have only gone out for 3 months, rented somewhere. But when I came home, I thought, I go out there, I rent somewhere, air-conditioned, I look at the sights, maybe a friend will come and stay with me, and what do? I don't speak the language. I'm in a foreign country in an air-conditioned flat, and it didn't kind of add up. It was Bobby who was going to buy. Now, Bobby uses the F word an awful lot. Bobby is an extremely wealthy man. But what the team either didn't know or certainly didn't tell us is it's actually quite difficult to live out there. Because like the Arabs, Dubai and places like that, if you buy anywhere, a business, a place to live, you've got to have a partner with 51%. And Bobby didn't like that idea, so he went off it pretty quickly. Even going out there, it would be difficult to live out there. Emma, the jeweler, she comes and goes. I think it's 6 months max, and then she comes back here and does business and then goes back. So those sorts of things you're not told about. I must admit, when they sent me out there, I was kind of hoping that Richard Gere would do a bit of it. He didn't. So no, seriously, I was never going to live there, but I thought it might be nice to spend 3 months of the English winter.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Yes?
Who is Bobby?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I didn't. I only knew Patty when we went out there. Bobby George was a world-famous darts player.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I should have explained. That's very naughty to assume that people know. So there was Miriam Margolyes, and I think everybody. Yes? Sylvester McCoy, who has been a Doctor Who. He's a jobbing actor. He's always around. Bobby George, the world-famous darts player. Roy Walker was the presenter of Countdown for many years. Wayne Sleep, world-famous ballet dancer. Patty Boulay, you all laughed when I said new faces. I don't know why. And me, I think, is that it? Is that 8? Who have I left out? But I didn't know any of them. And of course, they don't tell you. I think sometimes they don't tell you because perhaps you pull out. So it was a surprise. My goodness, was it a surprise. I mean, I've lived on my own so long. I love people. I love chatting, but not first thing in the morning. And you know, you'd got Miriam, who's big, and Rosemary, who's big, and Wayne, who never listens. And he doesn't. I could have killed him because you'll be having a conversation with somebody, I'll ask you, what colour is your tie? And you'll say, well, it's blue with green stripes. And then a second later, Wayne will say, yeah, what colour's your tie? And I don't know, maybe he's getting deaf. But that was one of the most difficult things, was this communal living. Well, you remember the film. I mean, that was just lovely. But the reality of being with a lot of, yeah, quite big egotistical characters is not easy. And certainly in Cuba, they split us up, and I was in a house with Wayne, and Miriam and Bobby were in another. They were in a house of two very artistic people. I wished I'd been there. I was in the house of a woman whose father was a leading light in the Cuban Revolution, and he was the first dean, I think, of the university there, and there were plaques on the wall. What was interesting was, even though these people were probably the higher rank of Cuban society, their cars were so old, and well, the ones that have been looked after are fantastic, you know, these great big American pinks, blues, greens. The rest are held together with string sealing wax and a prayer to God. But there's still the communism there. I tried with the taxi driver, I tried with Diana, our hostess. I didn't want to talk about it. I think, and don't quote me because it's only me, I think there's still this slight fear factor. And they've only just now allowed people to own property again. And you get these areas where there are beautiful, beautiful houses in rack and ruin, where the owners fled and they'll never come back. And the government hasn't got the money to do them up. And then you see the very poor people down by the waterside living very, very poorly. I gather if you go there for a beach holiday, it's all rather lovely, but if you go around the back quarters of Havana, it's not, and there's a lot of crime. They also say that because it's basically a communist society, that everybody is educated, which they are, and that medicine is free. They wouldn't allow us to go into a school or a hospital. And I tried and tried to find out, and it's basically because the buildings are falling apart. Once the Russians left, they've got no infrastructure. And one day, Diana said, is there anything I can get you? I said, well, I'd love some milk in my tea. Oh, wish I hadn't asked. She went to 7 supermarkets, and she couldn't get any milk. Well, they've got cows. I think they haven't got the refrigerated lorries. And you go, and everybody, every month, is allowed so much flour, so much sugar, the necessities of life. But those who've got money can go and get a great deal more, although even a great deal more is not that much more. It was interesting. Argentina, well, we were basically in a suburb of Buenos Aires, and it's all becoming a little bit formulated. You know, they take us to see how other countries treat their old people, but there's always the yoga class and the this class. And I don't know whether the format will last or not. I have to say the latest Real Marigold, which went out only about 6 weeks ago, I think is the best. I'm not sure if the production company, I mean, reality seems to sell. I'm not sure if the first programme they wanted us at each other. We weren't really. I mean, you know, we're all old and we get on with each other. But I think when they saw the success and they realised that you didn't need to introduce nastiness, it's become sweeter. And this one, I really wish I'd been with that group because they were lovely, really, really lovely. Whether there'll be another one, I don't know. Any more? Yes? Yes? What was it like, or the name? The name was the Khatu, K-H-A-T-U, Haveli. And Sushma and Emma came over about 2 months ago, and we had tea with them in London. Yes. And she said they are booked up solid. And she said, we come and we see these people, and they are all wanting tea. She said, we are not a restaurant. They're on the tourist route. And what made me very cross on behalf of the Maharaja. Even if the production company paid for our night's stay, they dropped every single frame of that film. So they didn't get any publicity. And that's obviously why they allowed us there. They didn't even send them the film. I finally got it out of them, and I couldn't send it to India. Sadly, things go missing. But they have relations who live in London, so I sent the package there. So at least they will have the film, but they didn't get the business. So it's the Khatu Haveli, and it really was lovely, and she cooks like a dream. But you won't be able to get in for the next year or two. You all want to go to bed, don't you? I tell you what, Paul and I thought it would be a good idea, because it's been a tough day concentrating on all these wonderful, wonderful lectures. So we asked if we could do the talk first. And we were told no, because the kitchen had organised, and when did we get our first course? 8:15. You could have all been in bed now. Thank you very much. I've had an absolutely wonderful